There's a photograph sitting in a drawer in my apartment. I've never framed it. I've never shown it to anyone. It's blurry, taken from about 300 meters through falling snow with someone's hands clearly shaking. You can barely make out the figures. A crowd, a lit tree, the dark outline of rooftops against a pale gray sky. And if you really look at the upper left corner, at the edge of the frame where most people's eyes don't go, there's a shape. Small, still, almost architectural against the stone. That's her. I don't know her name. I've asked. Nobody tells me anything. They just smile, that particular kind of smile that means the conversation ended about 30 seconds ago, you just haven't caught up yet. But I was there. December 23rd, and I will tell you exactly what happened as best as I can, because some things deserve to be said out loud even if no one is listening. The setup. You have to understand what Christmas in Edinburgh looks like if you've never been. Not the postcard version. Not the fairy lights strung prettily along Princes Street. Not the carousel spinning to tinny music outside the Scott Monument. Not the families with hot cider cupped in both hands like they're carrying something fragile and warm. The real version. The wind that comes off the Firth of Forth in late December is not polite about it. It doesn't ease in. It arrives like a door kicked open all at once, full-bodied, carrying the smell of sea salt and wet stone, and something colder underneath both of those things that has no good name. Your face goes numb in about 4 minutes. Your eyes water not because you're sad, but because your body is trying to protect itself from the temperature of the air. By the 23rd of December that year, they were forecasting the worst Christmas storm in 11 years. I was there for work, sort of. I'm a journalist, or I was then. Travel and culture mostly, not the serious kind. I wrote the pieces about hidden restaurants and walking tour and 5 things you didn't know about this city. My editor had sent me to cover the Christmas military ceremony at Edinburgh Castle. Annual tradition. Pipes, drums, Highland dress, the whole pageantry of it. The kind of thing that photographs beautifully and reads easily and requires very little of either of us. I'd arrived 2 days early because I always do. I like to walk a place before I write it. You find things that way, cracks in the official version. I wasn't looking for what I found. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 a.m. on the 23rd. By 9 a.m., the esplanade outside the castle was already filling. Tourists, yes, always tourists, with their cameras held up like offerings, but also locals. Families who'd been coming to this every year since their own parents brought them. Old men in good coats standing very straight, watching the military preparations with the specific attentiveness of people who recognize what they're seeing. Children who had no idea what they were watching, but understood that the adults around them considered it important, which was enough. I got there at 8:40, found a spot along the left barrier, far enough back to see the crowd as well as the castle, which is the journalist's instinct. The crowd is always half the story. It was cold, obviously cold, the kind of cold that has weight to it. The forecast was holding at snow by noon, but the sky already had that particular bruised color, somewhere between pewter and violet. That means snow is a formality at this point, not a prediction. The clouds weren't moving. That's the thing people don't tell you. When it's really going to come down, when the storm is serious, the clouds stop moving. They just sit there, flat and heavy, like they've already decided. The castle above us was lit, not in the decorative way, in the functional way. Every window, every parapet, every visible edge of that 700-year-old stone face glowing against the dark sky. It looked less like a building and more like something that had been here long before the concept of decoration existed and would be here long after. I wrote that sentence in my notebook at 8:53 a.m. I still have the notebook. 12 minutes later, everything changed. The build. The ceremony started at exactly 11, which meant that at 10:15 the security sweep happened. I didn't know much about security sweeps then. I know considerably more now. What I understood at the time was that men and women in dark clothing with earpieces moved through the crowd systematically, not urgently, checking things I couldn't identify with a practiced kind of calm that is itself a message. We are thorough, and we are not worried, and those two facts are related. Standard, fine, expected. What was not expected was the man with the backpack. I want to be careful here, because this is where storytelling becomes dangerous, where the brain starts retrofitting significance onto things that were, in the moment, ambiguous. I didn't know he was a threat. I want to be honest about that. What I knew at 10:22 a.m. was that a man in a dark green jacket was standing at the far right edge of the crowd, close to the secondary barrier, and he was behaving in a way that was slightly, fractionally wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not movie wrong, real wrong, which is subtler and worse. He wasn't watching the castle, he was watching the crowd. The direction of his attention was inverted, and his backpack, olive green, medium-sized, sitting a little heavy on his left shoulder, he kept adjusting it. Not the way you adjust a bag that's uncomfortable. The other way. The deliberate way. The way that means something inside it matters. I noticed him the way you notice a loose thread, distantly, uncomfortably. At 10:27, a security officer passed within about 6 feet of him. The man didn't look at the officer. Most people look. It's reflexive. You see authority approaching, you glance. He didn't glance. He adjusted the backpack and kept his eyes forward, and his jaw was set in a way that had nothing casual in it. The security officer moved on. I wrote in my notebook, "Man, green jacket, right barrier, watching wrong direction." Then I felt slightly ridiculous for writing it and turned to watch a child near me trying to balance on the bottom rung of the barrier and getting gently removed by her father, and I forgot about it for about 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes matter. I've thought about them a lot. At 10:31 the snow started. Not gently, not cinematically. Edinburgh snow in December arrives the way Edinburgh wind does, without ceremony, without build-up, all at once and personal about it. One moment the air was clear and brutally cold. The next the flakes were coming sideways, blown by a wind that had apparently been waiting just over the ridge, and the crowd made a collective sound, not quite a gasp, something softer than that, the sound of 2,000 people adjusting simultaneously. Umbrellas went up. Hoods went up. A few people left. The ones who stayed leaned in slightly, which is a Scottish thing, this physical acceptance of weather as a condition of life rather than an inconvenience to be escaped. The ceremony was still going. Pipe music cut through the wind with that particular quality that bagpipes have, the only instrument I know that sounds better in terrible weather, like it was designed specifically for this. I was pulling my collar up when I heard the first shout. Not words, not yet, just the raw-edged sound of a voice raised in an order, and then I looked up and the man in the green jacket was moving. Not running, moving, purposefully, at a pace designed not to alarm but designed to get somewhere. He was heading for a gap in the secondary crowd that had opened as people shuffled for weather, and beyond that gap was the inner cordon, and beyond that. I won't tell you what I thought in the next second, because the thought was so blunt and terrible and specific that putting it down in words still does something to my chest. What I will tell you is that a security officer saw him at the same moment I did. And what happened next happened faster than my brain could organize it into sequence. The officer moved toward him. The man saw the officer move. And then, this is the part that is hard to describe in a way that isn't melodrama, but it happened. I saw it. The man reached for the front of the backpack with both hands, and his face changed. The careful blankness cracked, and underneath, it was something I recognized from exactly nowhere in my life, but understood immediately and completely. He'd made a decision. The security officer shouted, "Get back, that's an order," loud enough that I heard it clearly over the wind and the pipes and the ambient roar of 2,000 people, heard each word separately and clean. People around me turned. Someone grabbed my arm, not meaning to, just reaching for something solid. The child on the barrier was already being lifted by her father and pressed against his chest. The man kept moving. And then, from somewhere above us, somewhere in the gray stone geography of the castle's upper reaches, in the narrow angle between the wind and the falling snow and the low, terrible light of a Scottish December morning, a single shot. One. The crowd sound changed completely. Not screaming. People talk about crowds screaming, and sometimes they do, but in the moment of genuine shock there is first this total erasure of noise, this half-second of collective silence that is the sound of 2,000 people's brains rerouting simultaneously. Then the man in the green jacket sat down. Onto the wet stone abruptly, like the decision to sit had come from somewhere outside of him. The backpack was still on his shoulders. His hands were at his side. He was alive, I could see that, the movement in him, the breath, but he was down, and he wasn't reaching for anything anymore. And the security officers were on him in seconds, 4 of them, moving with a coordinated speed that told me they'd been positioned and waiting, and the shot was something they'd expected in a way I hadn't. The pipe stopped. For about 6 seconds, Edinburgh Castle was completely silent except for the wind. 6 seconds of silence is a long time. I've timed it since. Standing in my kitchen, looking at the wall, counting to 6 with nothing else happening. It's long. Most people have never experienced a crowd of 2,000 people producing 0 sound for 6 consecutive seconds. There's a quality to it that isn't peace. It's closer to the feeling of a room where someone has just told you something that can't be untaken. Then someone began crying, a woman to my left, I think, though I didn't turn to look, and that opened everything. And the crowd noise came back all at once, layered and dissonant, and the security cordon expanded outward with a speed and a firmness that meant the conversation about where we were all going was over before it started. Move toward the main gate, please keep moving, this way, please move. Not shouting, never shouting. That measured, carry-the-room voice that crowd control training produces, the voice designed to be calm enough to induce calm. It worked on most people. There was pushing, yes, and a few moments near the right barrier where people were moving in 2 different directions, and the compression of bodies produced a low, animal sound of collective stress. But it organized itself faster than you'd expect, because the people of Edinburgh are, on balance, profoundly practical, and because what most people in a genuine emergency actually want is to be told what to do and where to go. And when you give them that clearly enough, they do it. I did not move immediately. This was partly professional instinct, the voice in the back of my skull that still wanted the story, even then, and partly something simpler and less dignified, which is that my legs had gone peculiar and moving them required a deliberate instruction from somewhere above the level of reflexes. I stood at the barrier for probably 20 seconds after the crowd began clearing, and I looked up at the castle. The shot had come from the left parapet. I was almost certain of that. The angle, the sound, that particular sound, which I will try to describe and know I will fail at, the way a single shot in an open space sounds nothing like film and everything like finality, the geometry of it pointed left and up. The parapet was empty, nothing there. No shape, no movement, no evidence. Which is exactly what you'd expect, which is the whole point of her position. A security officer, young, maybe 25, with snow in his hair that he hadn't thought to brush out, reached my section of the barrier and put a hand on the railing near me, not touching me but close. Professional closeness. A physical suggestion. "Ma'am, we need you to move through the main gate." "I'm press," I said, and held up my credential, which in that moment felt both important and faintly absurd. "I understand that. Through the main gate, please, briefing will follow." There was no briefing that followed. Not really. There was a statement released at 2 p.m. through official channels that confirmed a security incident had occurred, that it had been successfully neutralized, and that the ceremony would be rescheduled. The language was a marvel of saying nothing while appearing to say something. I've read press releases from government bodies for 15 years, and that one remains, genuinely, a monument of the form. I filed nothing that day. This was the first time in my career I'd ever sat in front of a blank document and chosen to leave it blank. The witness. Her name was Margaret, 61 years old. She'd been coming to this ceremony every year for 22 years, first with her husband, then after he died with her sister, and for the last 4 years alone. I met her in the crowd processing through the main gate. She was wearing a green wool coat that had seen better decades but was still doing its job, and she had her program from the ceremony rolled up in her right hand, and she was gripping it the way a person grips something when they need to feel that their hands still work. "You saw it," I said, not a question. I'd watched her face. "I saw the man go down," she said. Her voice was very steady, the kind of steady that comes from having been not steady through something and coming out the other side. "I didn't see the rest." "The shot." She looked at me. I heard it. We walked through the gate together, which neither of us decided. It just happened, the way things do in the loose social contract of shared shock. "Do you know," I started. "The castle always has security," she said before I'd finished the question. "My husband was a policeman. He used to tell me you don't see everything that's protecting you. That's rather the point." She looked back briefly at the parapet. "He was right, I suppose." She said it without satisfaction or grief, just the flat acknowledgement of someone updating a long-held belief with new data. We reached the road, and she thanked me for walking with her in the way that is not really thanks but is its own kind of human transaction. The acknowledgement of shared presence, of having been near the same thing at the same time. And she walked toward the Christmas market, which was still running, its lights blinking on and off in the snow, absolutely indifferent to what had just happened 200 meters away. I watched her go. The room she shot from. I'm going to tell you what I found out over the following 3 days, and I want to be honest that some of this came from sources who spoke off the record, and whose information I cannot verify in the official sense. What I can tell you is that none of it was denied when I put it to people who would have denied it if it were false. She'd been in position since 5 a.m. 5 in the morning, in December, on a Scottish parapet with the storm already building from the north. The temperature up there, with wind exposure, would have been somewhere around -8 Celsius. That's the kind of cold that stops being a sensation and starts being a physical fact of your body's relationship with space. She'd been up there for 6 hours by the time she fired. The shot was from, and this number was given to me by someone who would know and who I believe, approximately 280 meters, through falling snow, in wind that by 10:30 was gusting at 40 kilometers per hour with stronger peaks, at a moving target at an angle in conditions that would have changed the ballistics in ways that require real-time adjustment rather than calculation. One shot. The man in the green jacket was alive. This I confirmed. He was taken into custody, assessed medically, and this detail came from the same careful source. The shot had hit the outer right shoulder, clean through muscle and out, incapacitating, survivable. That's not luck. Let me be plain about that. At 280 meters in that wind, in that snow, at that angle, hitting a moving target in the shoulder, not the center mass, not the throat, not anywhere else, that's not luck. That is a decision made in a fraction of a second by someone who was trained to make it and trusted to execute it and then did. Incapacitate. Don't kill. Not because the protocol was soft, but because a body falling in a crowd with a backpack of unknown contents presents a specific set of physical risks, and a body sitting down presents different risks, and she knew the difference and she chose. I thought about that for a long time. What was in the backpack? I'll tell you this plainly, because it was released in a secondary document 6 weeks later and received almost no coverage because, by then the news cycle had moved on. which is its own kind of comment on how we pay attention. The backpack contained a detonation device and a quantity of material sufficient. The language was bureaucratic here, but the meaning was not to cause what was described as significant casualties within a concentrated civilian area. 2,000 people. On a castle esplanade. Christmas ceremony. I'm going to let that sit for a moment, because it deserves to. I called my editor that evening from my hotel room. The snow was proper now, thick and insistent against the window, the city below muffled and blurred by it, the Christmas lights strung along Prince's Street going woolly and indistinct. It looked, genuinely, like a snow globe, the kind of image a travel writer would use. "You have something," she said. "Not yet," I said. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer right away. I was looking at the castle through the snow. You could still see it. You can always see it. It's that kind of building, the kind that insists on its own presence regardless of weather or light or the preferences of the person looking at it. "It means," I said, "that I need to find out who she is." The search. I spent 2 days trying to find her name. I want to be transparent about the methods, because they weren't glamorous. No secret doors, no shadowy briefings, no sources in dark corners who slid folders across tables. Mostly I talked to people. Doormen, cafe workers, a retired military man I met at a pub near the Grassmarket who looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked the same question before and decided whether to answer it. He hadn't been there. He knew people who had. He had the particular economy of speech of someone who spent a long time in a profession where words were chosen carefully because the wrong word, at the wrong time, carried consequences. "Why do you want to know?" he said. "Because she's the story," I said. He looked at his pint. "She doesn't want to be the story, that's rather the job." I thought about that for a long time too. What I assembled across those 2 days was less a biography and more a silhouette, the shape of someone seen from the side in low light. She was not young. The phrase used by the person I found most credible, a woman who worked in administration at an office I won't name, who had seen something on a roster and wasn't technically violating anything by describing it in general terms, was experienced. Said in the particular way that means has been doing this for long enough that nobody questions the assignment. She'd requested the position, the parapet, the exposure, the conditions. This is the detail that stayed with me most, honestly, of all of it. In the days that followed, in the weeks, it's the one I kept returning to. She'd asked for that post. 6 hours in -8 wind, on stone in the dark, alone, while the city below her was asleep and then slowly waking, and then filling with families and tourists and children on barriers and old women in green coats clutching their programs. She chose it. Because she was the best for it, presumably. Because someone had run the numbers and looked at the variables and decided that this specific post, in this specific weather, with this specific threat profile, required whoever was best at exactly this thing. And she was it.